Okay, we're going to go ahead and start because we want to be on time, and I think there's another meeting here shortly after 1. My name is Bob Warner. I'm calling this meeting to order. This is the July 10th meeting of the Jonesboro Land Bank Commission, and we'll go ahead and have a roll call and assure our quorum. Jonathan?
All right. Ms. Durham, she's absent. Jeff Hurden? He's here. James Hollywood is going to be out. Mr. Martin, he's here.
Here.
Mr. Mills?
Present.
Mr. Moore?
Present.
Mr. Osment?
Here.
Mr. Warner's here, and Mr. Zolper is absent. All right, we have a quorum.
So we do have a quorum. We knew that James and that Becky were going to be absent, and Dennis may show up here shortly. So we'll move right on down to approval of the minutes. Has everyone had time to review the June 12th minutes?
I have. I make a motion they're approved.
Okay. There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any suggestions for changes? Not at all. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so the minutes stand approved. Thank you. So just to go through some old business, we want to talk a little bit about the Land Bank Commission bylaws. And I'm going to let Jonathan tell you where we stand on that part of this.
Right. So in your packet, you've got a completed copy of the resolution that shows the approval of our bylaws. Unless you have any specific questions, they were approved at, I think it was last Thursday's city council meeting. So I wanted to provide everybody with a final copy. So unless you have questions, we can move on from those.
Anybody have any questions about that? Okay.
The only major change that we really made, I was talking with Jessica earlier, there was some concerns about having to sell property for at least $1,000. We addressed that, we changed that, and so now it's on a case-by-case basis, and we can donate property if we want to.
So moving down to letter B in the old business, we just want to get a little updates. A few of us were able to go down to actually visit and attend a land bank meeting in Little Rock, and I think it was pretty eye-opening, and they're well organized. They've been doing this for a couple of decades, or at least a decade now. Daryl, you were there, and Bill was there, and Jonathan was there. So I'm going to just open the floor, and Jonathan, if you'll lead the discussion, and if you gentlemen want to add something, please do.
Okay. I wrote my notes over here, so.
And who else? Was anybody that's here? Yes, sir.
That was.
Yep.
I'll go ahead and start, and if I steal anybody.
Please chime in, and we'll just kind of get it on record of what we did and what we saw. And
I'll start. If I steal anybody's points, feel free to, butt in at any time. I put 6 points. The first one was that we needed to establish a revitalization area, but be open to accept property from all over the city limits of Jonesboro. So have one revitalization area, but be willing to accept any property, whether or not it's in our revitalization area. Second thing, we need to look at private-public partnerships. Little Rock has numerous partnerships they have with their city employees, school systems. They have a couple with some hospitals in the area. And, the partnership varies between each entity, but in essence, the land bank provides the cheap property, and whether it's the school system or the hospital, they provide either the down payment for the person to move into a home, or they provide the applicant who can qualify for the loan. Anyway, private-public partnerships, and it helps you maybe not bring in property to the land bank so much, but it'll help when we try to start selling and finding homeowners, right? My third point that, they talked quite a bit about was their involvement with neighborhood associations. I'm not sure who all is aware, but we really have, I think, maybe 5 neighborhood associations here in Jonesboro. They have, I think, close to 150 in Little Rock. Obviously, we won't ever get to that point, I don't think, but we still need to be, and I asked them directly if the land bank needed to play a role in helping these communities establish neighborhood associations. Their response to me was yes. The land bank played a role in creating some of those associations, and then they stayed actively involved with them after they helped create them so that they could communicate and know what was going on in the community. My fourth point, and this is more along the lines of our grants department and with Tiffany, but they do have access to home funds. And I'm not sure the process, again, that would be Tiffany, but I think if we qualify for it, that would be money that we would want to consider applying for, or at least trying to get access to. It would only help our cause. And then I was talking with Dr. Warner about this earlier. My fifth point kind of ties in together with my sixth point. There is a grants and community development already has identified, and they've put together a plan in the past that identifies a revitalization area. I think it's already expired. I think it was good for 5 years, their plan was, and I think it expired in 2017. But, we've talked about identifying 1 or 2, maybe 3 areas for revitalization. They've identified and done a lot of the work on the front end for that area. I think it might be beneficial for us to at least look at their plan and see what we think about it. It might be good to, instead of reinventing the wheel, trying to take that plan, update it, and go from there. And then tying into that, revitalization needs to be more than just redevelopment projects. We can revitalize a home and put new paint on old wood, but you got to have follow-up. You've got to have some sort of educational program that teaches these applicants the basic fundamentals of home ownership. The last thing we want to do is sell a property off to somebody and then turn around and 2 or 3 years later, it come right back to the land bank. And so they have a program that they send all of their applicants through, as well as Doug going back and following up on their projects. And so they stay connected to those applicants long after they've left the land bank, and it helps ensure that the property never gets brought back through the system. And those are the points I wrote down. I'm sure Dr. Warner and Jeff or Bill or Darrell has some others, but those are mine.
Would you all, Jeff, would you like to make some comments?
Well, I think Jonathan covered the ideas pretty good. I, in fact, had a chance to review that North Jonesboro revitalization plan. I found it very structured. I thought it was a good plan, and Habitat has already started some other programs in that area as well. So, and we are in the process of building 12 more homes in that area over the next 4 years. So it does lend itself to a good starting position. I did think that opening it up, Arkansas, Little Rock tried to do a specific area and center on that only, and they found out that didn't work, and they had to widen it out to citywide. Not only did it open it up more prospects, but it allowed them to have more property coming in that they could potentially make income off of to help support the overall program itself. It did seem like their program, of course, it's been established for a while, but they did have a lot of buy-in from a lot across the different agencies and industrial areas of the city. So I was real impressed.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Just to clarify a couple of remarks that were just made, and I may be incorrect, but my understanding was that the point Jeff made is really important. They first narrowed their focus, and they found that to be really, really cumbersome. And so they broadened it out, and they had a set of guidelines or strategies for revitalization, but they were able to then glean property from all over the city as opportunity arose. And they gave some examples. There was one example where a gentleman had bought a property that he planned to develop. However, it didn't work out that way. And so he just wanted to donate the property to the city. It was quite a valuable piece of property. and they were ultimately able to redevelop it for quite a bit of money, and that gave them kind of a boost in the very beginning. So I think the point being made that we do need to look at the entire city. Jeff, is that what you were
Yes.
saying as well? And then we do probably want to pick a couple of areas of revitalization, as Jonathan said, that we'll have a strategy about the guidelines. And I failed to introduce to the commissioners and to the public Jessica. Everybody probably knows Jessica Coleman, but she's our attorney that's going to support us from the city. And she gets a place at the table. We're even going to get her a placard with her name on it instead of Miss Attorney, which it says today. But thank you for that. Would you gentlemen want to say a couple of things? Darrell or Bill, you don't want to talk about your experience at the land bank? Yeah, I would you're coming up just to make this comment. The first few of these meetings are going to be a lot of education. We all are trying to be sure we're doing our job correctly, and so we're going to have to glean a good bit of information before we move forward.
I think, Jonathan really covered the points well. What I heard, particularly from Joan, a couple things. One was not targeting a specific area, as Jonathan and Dr. Warner mentioned, because there were cases that they found that they had acquired properties that proved to be beneficial later on. And in fact, when we were there, they actually went through the process of approving trade back on a couple properties that they had disposed of initially, and then it didn't work out for that party, and they actually wound up taking that property back and swapping it out for another property. So I got the idea that they were very flexible in what they were doing. And one of the comments that Joan made that really stuck with me is from the inception of the commission, they had made it relatively top heavy in terms of the people that were on the board. And she said what they found was the more diverse the board was in backgrounds of the individuals, that the better and more functional they were. And that they basically reinvented themselves at least one point in time back initially and after the inception of the board. And that stuck with me because it said that they were willing to look at, the agenda that they had, their bylaws and their mission statement, and they were able to revisit that and remake that and reform that as they needed to as they went forward. So I think flexibility is something that they found to be a great asset as they evolved into the process and function that they're at today. So I think that's just something to keep in mind as we move forward here. We're at the inception phase, and there's a lot of work to be done, but I don't think anything has to be concrete set in stone today. For example, our idea of minimum purchase price on properties, we've already talked about that, and I think that's the kind of thing that we heard in Little Rock, that we need to be flexible and look at issues like that as they come up to give ourselves the ability to kind of move and pivot as we need to. So that was primarily Jonathan did an excellent job of covering the points, and I think it was an excellent opportunity and a very good visit, and I think it was very informative, and hopefully we can do a lot of things to mirror their success going forward.
And I guess we didn't misbehave too badly. We got invited back, so we'll try to do that again maybe next quarter if anybody wants an opportunity. Darrell, you want to add anything? Sure. Really appreciate everybody going. Yes, sir.
We did. There was one other point that I think is worthwhile mentioning, and that was there were instances, particularly when they built a home, that they marketed that home below market value. So, and they specifically said that this is not something that you're going to make any money on, that you look at the secondary effects to the city
Secondary gains. Yes. It's an excellent point, and I'm glad you remember that. I'd forgotten, but they did do. In fact, they showed some houses that had been built through their program, and it was astounding at what they were being able to sell them for. But you have a better understanding than most of us, probably from the Habitat experience, how that works. I would also mention to you that we'll get all the commissioners a copy of this outdated revitalization strategy area plan. This is from the 2012. Jonathan, can we do that? And just to give you an example of what's in here, it's got the purpose of this plan to obtain commitments to neighborhood building, make neighborhoods attractive for investment. That'd be some secondary gain that you just brought up. generate neighborhood participation to ensure the benefits for economic activity are reinvested in that neighborhood, support use of neighborhood institutions that bridge the gaps between government support and the business community, and then to foster the growth of the neighborhood in the right direction. And so I do think that makes the point for the commissioners that we do want to try to come up with some strategy that might end up being our guiding beacon when we look at each individual property as we do that. And Jessica, I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to put you on the spot right this minute, but perhaps in a minute to comment about what we talked about just before the meeting as far as liens and as far as if we do have a strategy in a neighborhood that we can use that to make our decisions so we don't get in trouble with any difficulty legally. Yeah, Jonathan.
Before we move on, I just want to reiterate what he pointed out, and this is something that Joan kind of, talked to me several times about since I've been talking with Little Rock about these issues. Revitalization means that we're
I
probably
might tell who Joan is.
Joan's the lady that we went. She started the land bank in Little Rock. Joan Adcock. I think she's actually a director for the city of Little Rock now, but on the city council. But anyway, I've been communicating with her and with Doug off and on for the past few months. But one of the things they keep telling me is revitalization doesn't come with a profit motive, right? So we're not going to be making money on some of these deals. And that's something we need to be aware of going into it. As Jeff pointed out, there's going to be instances where we approve a development or we approve the sale of a property or the sale of a house, and it looks like we're going to lose money on that. And, revitalization sometimes means that you're going to lose money when you make a transaction. But that's the goal of revitalization is to go in there and revitalize that area, and that sometimes is going to mean we lose money.
Well, the point they made is that you may sell the property for below market, but you won't lose in the overall quality and development of the neighborhood. It'll be a positive secondary gain. I think, Jeff, you made that point a while ago again. So that and I will tell you that we were treated with the utmost hospitality in Little Rock. They were very, very pleased that we came and in fact stayed for an hour after their normally scheduled meeting and answered questions and had a good dialogue. And so again, we'll try to schedule that again in a quarter or so if people that missed it want to try to take advantage of that opportunity. So at last time, we're going to move down to letter C, if that's all right. Does anybody have anything else before we move forward?
I did have one question.
Absolutely.
Jeff, and you might be able to help out with this. I know we're talking about selling stuff below market value, and I understand that as far as or in regards to lots, but and I might have just been confused with the statement. Did they actually build a house and selling them below market value or building on the property? And if so, who was it that was actually doing the building on it? Was it a partnership with somebody outside of?
I'm not sure I fully understand the whole aspects of it, but it was a combination of the city's construction management program. I don't know exactly what function he had. They did sell the house, and if I remember right, it sold for like $65,000 with a retail market in that area of around 90, if I remember the numbers, and I may be off, but they did sell it below market, and it was a loss to them for that particular house, but the secondary effects was something that was going to be a big gain.
Was it something they knew that they were going to be losing on?
Yeah, on the front end. And the reason they were able to do that, Jeremy, is they had some funds we don't have access to, and they've had lots of partnerships with people, and so the concept of losing money, I guess, from a developer's point of view, I mean, if I were building something, obviously you don't want to lose money. That the house was paid for with third-party funds or with city funds in some cases, and then they sold it for below market, but they didn't actually lose anything. No. And all they were looking at was that, well, this house fits the plan. The other point they made, and I'm sorry I didn't think of this earlier, so they showed a couple of these houses that we're discussing now, and when they did that, the next thing that happened is a developer shows up and bought several other lots around, and they had great photographs showing an entire street, for example, changing the face of the street completely with private funds. So that's a great example maybe of the secondary value you get for doing some of these things. So
Yeah.
it wasn't a concept of they were bad planners. They just had money and they weren't interested in the profit side. They were just interested in getting the house built.
Sure, and I understand getting on the
That
secondary.
makes sense?
No, it makes
sense.
total sense. But so did somebody with the city actually build the property, or did they hire an outside contractor and they just paid for that outside contractor?
The outside contractor, as I understand, and
With the city's
fine.
manager overseeing the program.
To be sure that, and that's Jessica's going to comment on that in a little bit, but they did have parameters that that the developer had to meet. And so in the aspect of the contractor, they actually probably made a profit on the house for building it. What else about that? Was there another question? I'm going to move on to the revitalization areas we've discussed. Last week, I believe y'all had a little bit of a presentation from Jonathan on North Jonesboro and maybe the Crest, was it Crest and Hope Streets? And I'm going to turn this over to Jonathan. Again, this is for information purposes for the commissioners, so we're going to go over a couple of 3 other areas. Is that what you got?
So what I did last time was I tried to identify 2 areas, and I spent time going through and color coding the map and whatnot, and I showed y'all guys that. Since that time, I thought it'd be a lot easier just to get some information from, I got from 911. I went by engineering and got a couple of maps. So I'm going to show you just overall maps instead of zooming in specifically again. That way you can see how one area relates to the other areas of Jonesboro, which might help, when we go to start identifying some of these revitalization areas, it might help in your decision-making process. So this first map that you're looking at is from our 911 dispatch. And I don't know if this arrow will show up on here. It does. So one of the areas that I'd focused on last time was North Jonesboro, which if you're looking at your screen here, I got my mouse over it. You can tell that this obviously has a higher 911 call log than some of the other areas of Jonesboro. I guess I should explain the key there. The darker the green, the higher the 911 calls. So there's 2 areas really, North Jonesboro, and then you got Apartment City, and then some of the West End, Huntington, Washington area is some of the areas that we focused on.
What were these 911 calls about? Violent emergency?
This is all 911 calls that come through dispatch. So it could be major crimes. It could just be somebody that needs an ambulance or whatever. It's just 911 calls. But I'm about to overlay this, or not overlay it, but show you a second map that I got from code enforcement. This right here is from 911 dispatch. This next map that you're looking at is from code enforcement. And the dots symbolize open code enforcement issues that are going on right now. And so if you look at the maps together, sorry, I can't put 2 maps up here at once, but if you were to look at them at the same time, you would see that there's a high concentration of 911 calls and code enforcement violations in that same area right here. And then it kind of speaks for itself over here as well. Any questions? All right, so we'll move on. This next slide, this next map, I guess if you want to call it that, is from our engineering department. It shows vacant parcels. The reason why, I guess I could explain the reason why I picked these maps before I get too far into this. But one of the, if I can find the exact paragraph here. One of the things in our bylaws says that these areas for revitalization could have, for example, vacant structures, criminal activity, or high poverty rates. So I picked these maps to show those statistics, or try to show those statistics. This right here is a map that shows the vacant lots. And you can tell, again, if you see 141 and 90 at that intersection, there's a high concentration of vacant lots there. And then toward Huntington, Cruson, and then over toward Hope and Creeth, where I showed y'all guys last time. And if it makes it easier and y'all guys can go back and look at it, I can send these maps, the digital forms to y'all guys so that y'all can look at this when you get home or get back to your offices. And then these next 3 slides is going to be representative for the income distributions for this area. So this is a map that shows income in 1990. Obviously, the darker that you go on the scale, the higher your income level. And one thing I want to point out is if you watch the West End and the north areas of Jonesboro, what you'll see is from 1990 to 2000, their income in this area, for the most part, increased. And then for whatever reason, from 2000 to 2013, where this statistical information stopped, it decreased again back down to an average of 35,000 or less. And so this is an area where if we're going to look at criminal activity, if we're going to look at vacant lots, if we're going to look at income information, and we're going to identify that, this area obviously would meet those requirements. Same thing for the West End, Huntington, Cruson area, and the maps that I showed you for Hope and Creeth last week or last month. And then here is just we've been talking about some income or some development projects through CDBG. Obviously, there are income requirements for that. This is what those income requirements are for 2018. If you look at the traditional family of 4, you can see that a person could make $44,000, or a family could make $44,950 and still qualify as low to moderate income in the city limits of Jonesboro. And if you take that information and you tie that into the most recent information I could find was 2016. So there's going to be some statistical error in this, but if you tie that information to our 2016 statistics, close to 45 to 46% of the individuals who live in that census tract qualify for CDBG funding of some sort. And so this gets back to what they were asking about that development project in Little Rock. That was actually a partnership with Kevin and Dr. Adams in their CDBG program, where they were able to rehab a house and turn it into a primary residence for a family, partnering with CDBG funding and some of their home funds, which that would be more along the lines of Tiffany, but these are the income requirements and demographics that go along with that. I think y'all guys have already seen this map, right, that shows the comparison between rental homes and homeowners. Blue is homeowners, yellow is rental property. This ties into leased to owner occupied housing areas. And this right here again is the 911 map, zoomed in a little bit on that area that shows the calls. And then I wanted to tie in, I'm not sure if I showed y'all this one, Huntington and Cruson. Again, it shows the number of homeowners compared to rental properties and undeveloped lots. And then this right here, you can tell, is the 911 map again. And then I think I showed that to y'all last month as well. And that area actually has a lot of undeveloped lots, so you're not seeing very many 911 calls come from there. But those are some of the maps. I'll send those out to y'all guys sometime later this afternoon so everybody can take a look. And I'll send them with the same email that I send the revitalization plan. So y'all guys can look all that over. Anybody have any questions before we move on?
I do. Jonathan, the last time I thought I'm trying to remember, but mainly we focused on properties that were dilapidated or abandoned or there were liens on, and you just mentioned illegal activities, and I didn't. But it's interesting. I know of a couple of instances people that I know have tried to buy houses in neighborhoods because there's just drugs specifically, and they belong to landlords, and they offered them really a lot of money for a couple of houses, and they haven't been able to put the deals together, that they just won't sell. So is that seems like it's pretty low hanging fruit. If you could get somebody out of that and put somebody, even if you took a loss, to your point, I see where that would be beneficial to move a family in that maybe is lower income and give them a deal on it. That would be a big plus for a neighborhood. So is that what you were talking about when you're saying, how would we approach that? How could we buy when you got an unwilling seller, but I know specifically one house, and the police even know what's going on in it, and it just seems like, I guess the drug dealers just like that house, and they just keep coming back and renting it. But anyway.
Well, from what we were showing today, these maps represent not just, criminal activity or whatever. They're representative of all 911 calls. So this could be somebody who's, needs an ambulance because they're having a heart attack, or it could be somebody whose house got broken into. You can't really separate those.
And I think part of your question too is, how do we acquire those homes?
Yes.
If someone's not willing to sell and we don't have a lien on it, the only other way I think under the law that you could acquire the property would be through essentially like a nuisance condemnation, saying that there's so much of a problem. And really what typically the court would do on that is then restrict them on who they can, like if you're talking about a landlord situation, we've done it with other properties. But it doesn't necessarily get us the property. Most of the time, the court's just going to limit who they can rent it to and put some restrictions on that property itself. I think that's more maybe a consideration y'all can look at when you decide what property to buy, as opposed to how we can actually acquire property, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
I know there's been situations in the past where Tim and Mike from code enforcement have gone to abandoned houses or houses that have criminal activity, but nobody lives in them regularly. And they've asked them to board those houses up. And then there's sections in our code that talk about how long they can be boarded up for. So those could be avenues through which you could address those issues, but obviously it'd have to be done on a case-by-case basis. And we'd have to work with Tim and code enforcement to address them.
Just a point of clarification, there's numerous ways that these properties came into the land bank in Little Rock. A lot of donations, some acquisition with various partners who had funding, some development grants, some code enforcement violations that had gotten to the extent, as Jessica mentioned, to become a nuisance property and had a heavy lien. So there's lots and lots of different ways that you'll end up with these. And I think, I hope that once we open the door to that we'll have more work than we want to do as far as properties that we can acquire. The big thing, they made the point, I'll reiterate to you again, they started out when they talked about a revitalizing area, they had first called it a focus area, which was not a good choice of wording, because they were going to revitalize an area, but they were going to only take properties in from that area as well. And they abandoned that strategy early in their life of their commission and began to just look for opportunity across the entire city. So there will be lots of different ways that these properties will come to our attention, I think. Does that seem accurate to everybody? Did I say that correctly? Okay. What else, Jonathan, you have to say about these areas?
That's,
So maybe just summarize the kind of the 5 areas that you have sort of looked over.
So I kind of left some of the information out because I wasn't expecting to go over all of it, but just to highlight the points real quick. North Jonesboro is one of the areas that we've identified, or one of the areas that I've looked at. And I can, before I get into all of them, if y'all guys have an area that y'all want me to do some research into, just call me or come by the office or email me and we'll look at it. But that being said, I've looked at North Jonesboro. I've looked at Hope and Creeth. I've looked at Huntington and Cruson, that area. We've looked at the West End area, and I believe we've looked a little bit at the old downtown Nettleton area, but we kind of backed off of that a little bit because of floodplain issues, flooding issues, drainage issues. So those are the 5 main areas, and I can get that information to y'all guys after the meeting so y'all can summarize it. But that's really all I have for that. At some point, I will say at some point in the future, we'll have to to look at it. And as we've, stated previously, we're going to have to pick 1 or 2, 3 areas that we want to revitalize. But then, just because we select those 3 areas or those 2 areas, that doesn't mean that we can't accept property from other places in Jonesboro. So the revitalization areas are just going to be where we try to focus some of our resources, but we'll still accept properties from other areas of Jonesboro. So.
In follow-up to this, I'm not going to do this today, but we're contemplating appointing a subcommittee of 2 or 3 commissioners that are very interested in this to look at what our priorities might be in an area. And you can get that. That'll be right out of our priorities that we've already adopted. But I wanted maybe some concise explanation so that when we do have a project come before us, maybe that committee could report back and say this project meets the criteria or doesn't, and do a little bit of the work before we're here, trying to do it in an hour. So a little homework committee, if you will, and we'll talk about doing that the next time. If nobody has anything else, I'm going to move forward. We're going to go to the new business, number 5, letter A. We want to review 4 of the land bank documents. I hope that those should have been in your packet. I hope so you've taken some time to look at those. And this will require a commission action. So as we look at these, I'll accept motions to approve them as we go through them, or we can do it as a group. Does anyone want to open the discussion or make a motion about that?
I do want to state, I know Jessica, I think Carol actually looked over my offer and acceptance contract. Jeremy, you've done real estate in the past as well, so if you want to just focus on that real quick.
Which one?
Sure. The offer and acceptance for real property. I know Carol has approved it, and I've used similar forms in the past, but obviously I've not been a full-time real estate agent going forward, so I want just to double check and make sure Jessica's comfortable with it and make sure Jeremy's comfortable with it.
Well, I'll accept the motion so we can discuss it. Does anyone want to move that we accept this document or not accept it? Doesn't mean we're going to accept it. We're going to vote on it, but we need a motion.
I make a motion that we accept the document.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Jeremy's a second. Okay. Is there discussion? Y'all know the one. This is what we're looking at. Y'all know this. And you said Carol did look at this.
Yeah, Carol looked at it.
As long as Carol did.
Yeah, she's already approved it. Yeah. She already approved it. I just wanted to make sure that since Jessica's going to be the one looking at them, and I want to make sure she's comfortable with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, I think, unless anybody sees an issue that we need to discuss.
And I think it's safe to say that these are not going to be in stone. Should moving forward, these cause us some problems, that they can always be amended and altered.
Should there be a disclosure that they fill out on this, like hazardous waste or, I don't know,
Well, even when you buy residential property, y'all correct me because I'm not a real estate guy, but you have, as an owner, to sell something, you have to fill out a pretty lengthy disclosure form.
I don't think in the state of Arkansas you're required to.
But
Probably.
Jessica, would we be able to require that of someone if we wanted to?
I mean, that's a really specific real estate question about I mean, I would have to look at it to tell you whether we had to do it or not. That would probably be more of someone who actually buys and sells real estate would know better than I would. I mean, I can only tell you from my experience of buying and selling real estate where you do have to fill out disclosures, but that could be whatever reason.
That's good. So that's a valid question, guys. So would we leave that at this to let Jessica research it and bring it back to us as a separate form? Should we need it? Would that be acceptable?
I think so. I'm just thinking like there's a piece of property I bought really old and it had a gas tank underneath it. We didn't catch it and it cost me a lot of money. So I could see someone donating and
we don't want to be liable for that as a public commission.
There's a part of the donation process is we'll be doing some of those things. Like you have the ability to do
Due diligence.
like any environment, like what you're describing is essentially maybe an environmental kind of concern. We'll have people look into these properties before we ever accept them from donation. So you're not talking about, there's going to be a lot done on the front end. Like if you look at the donation application process set out, there's a lot that's going to be done through Jonathan in the city before we're ever
Faced
to the
with the-
point of a contract necessarily. Like, because that's one of the things we talked about with Little Rock is because they made people part of their bylaws was you had to put the deed into escrow. Y'all's bylaws actually say it can be placed in escrow. I don't know if y'all looked at that distinction, because what Little Rock said is essentially that became a non-issue because they did the research on the front end. There was no longer that need to put it in escrow. So I understand the concerns, but I think a lot of that's going to be handled before we ever get there.
And I'm with you on that. I mean, I think it's a very simple offer and acceptance that we have. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, as compared to what a normal real estate contract is in the state of Arkansas. But all the due diligence should be done up front, where this is basically all that we do need.
And we actually saw that at work in Little Rock. They had a couple of issues that they were taking for action, and those properties had been thoroughly vetted prior to this. So this is basically a legal document to accept property after all that's done. Yes, sir.
That's not what-
Is there any further discussion on the offer and acceptance of real property document? If not, I want to go ahead and vote on that. Is there anyone, or let me ask this way, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's adopted. The next is a letter, Jonathan, this is your letter of interest, isn't it?
So this is going to be a letter, once y'all guys approve, or once y'all, get ready to start trying to acquire property, this will be a letter that we send to the owner as that initial point of contact, just to see if they'd be willing to sell. Read it over, just make sure you're okay with the wording, and
I'll accept a motion to approve this document. You might want to do that.
I'll make a motion to approve it as presented.
Brent, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. So any discussion? I just had one question on this. How will we make a determination of who these would be sent to and when? And the reason I asked the question, Jonathan, is that we don't want to send out 100 of these, at once. And I'm not saying you would do that, but what is our criteria going to be for that?
so I think our priorities and policies kind of set that criteria. That's kind of what that subcommittee, we want to
Yes.
identify lots that we think we could acquire strategically, whether it's vacant lots, undeveloped lots, whether it's properties that have liens, whether it's, a project that we've been approached by a private developer. Whatever the case may be, we've got a list of things in our priorities that, kind of justify acquiring some of these lots. So we'll use those justifications to identify those lots. And then when y'all guys approve me to do so, I can take these letters and mail them out.
So let me ask the commissioners, as part of this discussion, how would y'all like these letters to be distributed? Would you want Jonathan to present potential properties at the meeting and we look through the list and then approve the letters? Jonathan, is that what you're saying too, or what?
I can.
What is your thought?
I don't think it's really going to do me any good to send out all these letters if at the end of the day, y'all guys aren't going to be willing to approve them coming into the land bank. So I think y'all guys should at least look at the list. Even if y'all approve me sending these letters out, the owners still may not, as Ray pointed out, the owners still may not want to sell.
Sure.
So I think you should approve the list.
Yeah, all I'm doing,
Letters.
okay.
Want to do a focus area first and keep it
Well,
on.
that's why it's going to be in like the revitalization area.
So the core of the question I'm bringing up is, I think, do we want Jonathan to bring us a list as a group of commissioners us look it over and approve it. It can be, the list can get approved each meeting, but you guys want to have some
Yes.
upfront approval of that, don't you?
Well, I mean, because it basically just him spinning his wheels and wasting time if it's
Okay.
something that we don't agree with in the beginning, for him to turn around and send the letters out first.
Okay, so that's just a process. So I don't know that it needs a vote, but that's how we'll do it and see how it works. And is it
Now-
okay with you to do that?
Yeah, that'll be fine. Now, as far as other properties, for example, if somebody wants to donate a piece of property, this letter may not have been sent. So there could be instances where you do have a piece of property on the agenda that y'all have obviously
Understand.
not approved to be on there, but they wanted to donate it anyway.
I think what we're hearing from the group, though, is that if you're going to solicit properties
Yeah.
with this letter, that they'd like to see what properties ahead of time. And that's just doesn't require any voting. It's just how we'll do it until y'all tell us to do it differently.
And the idea would be that the solicitation would be for properties in our revitalization area, not the whole city. I mean, you would only want to buy in the area that you want to put your main focus, I would think.
Okay,
Same idea.
agree with that. So we've got a little work to do on what areas we're going to revitalize for that purpose. Okay, so let's go back to the issue at hand. Does anyone have any further discussion about the document itself? Anybody all in favor of adopting this document?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now, are we going to you want to do this one next, or
Let's look at the property donation, which should be,
okay. So it's Jonesboro Land Bank property donation application. I'll accept a motion to approve this document.
this will be the form that, as I mentioned previously, if somebody comes to me and they want to donate it to property, this will be the form that they have to fill out. And then I'll go through the process of addressing any issues that could be on the property.
So pay particular attention in this document to the last page. This is the due diligence process we discussed earlier. Make sure that you agree with that, or if you want to add some other comment or some edit to this, feel free to do so.
In this case, if we have a POA, will we need that on file as well before a POA does sign off on this? Yes.
I'd refer to Jessica on that.
Power of attorney for this. It's mentioned right here. Before we move on, I'm going to accept a motion to approve this, or we'll end the discussion. Does anybody want to make a motion? Doesn't mean we're going to approve it, just means we got to have a motion on the floor.
Motion to approve as written.
Second?
Second.
Corey's second. Okay, now we can continue the discussion.
Okay, so what's your question?
On this first sentence, it says the form may only be completed by the owner of the property or by a person with authorization to act on behalf of the owner by virtue of power of attorney. Will we have a power of attorney disclosure submitted along with this application?
I mean, I think that as a practical matter, they're going to have to prove their power of attorney before we would accept it. I mean, we're able to research who the property owner is, but they're going to have to provide us with something showing their power of attorney. Otherwise, there's really not, I don't think.
We need to record that.
So the answer is yes, that would be included with the application.
And I don't think that necessarily, as a legal practical matter, I don't know that that necessarily needs a spot on the form. I think that's just kind of basic practice of the office.
This needs to be in the packet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
So Jonathan, if you were to get this document and it was of someone with power of attorney, then that document has to be included as part of the due diligence. Corey, that satisfactory?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion, questions about this document? Please pay attention again to the last page. It's the most important part of this. And obviously, Ray, this goes back to your comment earlier. I think with this process in place, that it will allow Jonathan and his staff to go back and ask even additional questions. They don't just, if they're not in the box, doesn't mean we can't ask the question. I think that there's enough things on this back page to open up inquiry about a property to be sure we've covered everything before we would accept it. Any other discussion? All in favor of accepting this document? Any opposed? Okay, well, the last document's going to be a very similar document. This is land disposition application. Jonathan, you want to say something to this document?
So if somebody wants to purchase property from the land bank, they're going to fill this application out. If you go through it, you'll see that obviously the first parts, if, you know, for example, if we're going to partner again with CDBG, there's income requirements and things of that nature that have to be disclosed on the front end. So that household size and annual income, that's to satisfy any CDBG or federal funding that we may have in a project. If they're not going to have federal funds involved, then they're going to skip over that. But then getting to the rest of the application, this is where we're going to have the property information. This is where we're going to find out what they want to do with the property. This is also where we find out if they have the financing to be able to do that. And then obviously the last page is the certification saying that everything they're telling us is truthful and whatnot. So this is the document you'll see. You probably won't see as much starting off because we're going to be busy trying to acquire properties. But once we start acquiring properties, we need to have a form that lets us gather the information that we need in order to make a informed decision on a property before we sell it. So this is what that form will do.
So if you'll also look at the last 2 pages of this document, it tells you the things that came right out of our priorities document and policies governing disposition of property. I'm going to call on Jessica for just a minute to talk about the things that we can and can't do in regards to a property. In other words, if we have a property in the land bank, we have someone interested in developing the property. Can you address that a little bit, Jessica?
Sure. I think some of the talk we talked about were essentially how do we ensure the development happens? And one of the questions brought to me was a discussion about deed restrictions. Little Rock does it where they only restrict with time. I don't know if you understand how deed restrictions work. Essentially, you're putting something in the deed saying you have to do X, Y, and Z within the deed. The only way to enforce a deed restriction is essentially going to court. So it'd have to be after the fact, the restriction hasn't been met, and then we essentially have to file a complaint through civil court action. And the court doesn't look favorably on deed restrictions. Like they find against them if they find a way, essentially. Like the court does not like to restrict property if it can help it.
Property use.
So at the end of the day, I think we have some options, and I think that's kind of some things we've discussed just today that I think we need to consider. And I think a lot of too is if we're careful in the beginning about who you choose, what developers use and what kind of plans they have, hopefully this is a problem that doesn't really arise. But if we anticipate, I'm happy to research whatever y'all want to research about what options y'all might want to put in on how to restrict use of property and to ensure the property is used in the way that you want. I'm open to whatever y'all might want to do and figuring out what the answers are to those questions.
So this is just, again, a point of information for us today. But if you do have questions, please address those to Jessica so that we can look at this area. The other thing I mentioned to you briefly earlier, we will appoint a subcommittee that will vet this particular document when it's been filled out and sent to us to report back to the entire commission whether they're meeting the criteria and the goals of the area that we're choosing to revitalize. So does that sound okay to everyone? Does that make sense? In other words, when this comes before you, we'll have a report from our own subcommittee that says, yes, this meets the criteria of what we're trying to do in an area of the city. So that's really not, again, about the document. It's kind of about the use of the document. Does anyone have any further discussion about the document itself?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
On the policy page, last page, item 10, there's not a full restriction, but a restriction that you have to be a resident of Jonesboro or a principal business in Jonesboro to purchase a property. Is there a reason for that?
It's a good question.
Where are you again?
It's on the last page of the document we looked at on the policies, it's item number 10.
I think it was, to answer your question, it was how that Little Rock had originally formed theirs. We can change it. I think we'd probably be wise to change it because.
Well, let's see what everybody wants to do, because I'm not so sure.
I will point out that it says the commission that has the ability to seek an exception. So if you don't have to follow that. You've allowed that in your own policy and procedures.
Jeremy, you had a comment you want to share?
Well, no, I mean, and again, just like she said, that we have that ability to turn around and make an exception, but you know, everybody living outside the city of Jonesboro doesn't always have our best interests at heart whenever it comes down to what they develop or what they build here. So, I mean, I like the way it's written, and I mean, I think it needs to say the way it is, and if there's an exception that needs to be brought into later on, then we can make that exception.
Did you make the motion on this document? Who made the motion for this? Jeremy, you did.
It was one.
I don't think there has one yet.
Okay, I'll take a motion. Jeff, you want to do that? Do you,
Yeah, I'll make the motion that we accept the document as written.
is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Do you want to discuss any amending of that particular part of it, that number 10?
Well, I guess we have other documents that indicate that land use that's going to be used for the property and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not so keen on the fact that we restrict it to Jonesboro residents, even though we have the capability of letting somebody else in there. It seems to me like our other documents kind of give us the idea of what the land's going to be for and et cetera. So I don't have a great desire to have this in here.
Other comments?
I see his reasoning. It's just, the wording just limits off top.
I see Jeff's concern. Anybody from out of town, more than likely, it's an investment, and that's all it is what your return's going to be on it. I mean, if you're local, I have several apartment communities, and they're investments, but I also take pride in them a lot more so than probably if I owned one in another town that I didn't live in. And I'm not saying that. Anyway, I see both sides of it. I think it's strictly an investment play for somebody from out of town, unless they grew up here and lived across the street. That might be. But if there's an ability, we have the ability to make an exception because we think the developer or the purchaser's going to do something really good, that are going to have a long-term interest in the property besides financial, that they really care about the area, then. But I see Jeff's concern too. If we got those restrictions in place on the front end, then maybe it doesn't matter who owns it or where they live.
My understanding, just as a question here, that this doesn't preclude someone from outside the city to apply. It just means that we have to make an exception to accept the application. Is that, Jessica?
That's correct. I mean, anybody can apply and y'all can look at it and deny it for that reason. It doesn't actually limit you for what applications you can take. My argument legally would be it just gives you the ability to deny an application. If you don't think it's a good application or you don't think they have the right intentions with the property, that gives you a way to say, no, you're not from Jonesboro, we're not interested, but it doesn't stop us from taking the application. So I think it actually doesn't really limit you as much as you might think in legally. I mean, I think you could take any application.
Okay.
Do we want to accept an amendment? Jeff, do you want to amend it or you want to leave it be?
I think with that clarification, that it's okay.
Okay. Any further discussion at this point? So we'll vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so that document passes. Is that the last document, Jonathan?
Yep.
Okay, we're running a little bit here tight, so everything else for you guys is just information. Jonathan have you sent this out yet? We have there's a brochure that we're going to just kind of circulate for you to look at. This is not an official document yet. We would like input back to Jonathan about what you think of it, what additions you would make. The only addition I've added so far is I want to put Jessica's name on here as well for contact for us as a commission. It also has a mailer piece on the back, so this can be mailed to people who are interested to know about land bank business. And the other thing that we tentatively are thinking about is to have an insert that'll have a little bit more information about the commission and the commissioners. So I'll if y'all just wouldn't mind to look at that and then give Jonathan some feedback, maybe in the next couple of weeks, that would be great. We're going to move to letter C, and that's simply the Jets bus tour. Give you some logistics. Jonathan, help me if I say it wrong. Crystal is going to coordinate this through the mayor's office. We are looking for a time and a day. I would like for each of you guys to kind of talk about a time of day. I know a lot of people work on the commission, and we're thinking maybe one afternoon or a Saturday morning. And the purpose of this is to actually go out away from the city offices and see these areas that Jonathan has taken the time to put together with your own eyes. We can take, help me, 18 plus 5, right? 23 people on
The bus will sit 16, and then I think he has standing
room,
five,
and then a couple of other
and
seats.
then a couple of other wheelchairs.
So we've got plenty of room. I suspect we won't get 23 people. The press is invited, by the way, on this tour, as always. And we just want you as commissioners to have firsthand experience with the neighborhoods that you're going to be talking about through. What time of day works for everybody? Does anybody have a thought?
Anything works for me.
Okay, the late afternoon better, Jeremy, for you, or
And that probably, I mean,
morning?
are we looking at doing this in the next
In a
few
couple
weeks?
of 3 weeks, yes.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be fine.
Like
Anytime.
8 or 9 in the morning, or 4 or 5 in the afternoon?
Anytime, I'll make it happen.
You're good. What about you guys?
I can make anything work.
Brent works. Corey? Jeff, you have a preference?
I'm retired.
So Jessica, I assume are you going to go with us? You care?
As long as it fits in my schedule, I can
Okay.
try to go. I don't know,
As long as you're not in the
are we talking
courtroom.
about a Saturday?
Probably going to talk about a weekday, I think.
I can make it work.
We'll, and these guys over here are smiling. They're going, y'all have to come on the tour. You're invited. But what we'll try to do is we'll get that put together. We'll let Crystal decide, since y'all are all so easy to deal with. But what our plan would be is to pick a couple of these areas and actually go and see those and have people on board with us that can answer questions about what you're seeing. I think it'll open your eyes a little bit to know that this commission has a real charge and a real duty that can be very positive for our city. Having said all of that, we can now move into public comment. We have a little public here today, not much. Does anybody want to say anything? Okay.
Name is Greg Otter. I have a not-for-profit organization right here in the city. We cater to less privileged.
Greg, can I ask you your address, please, sir?
Address?
Where did your home address?
1001 Brownstone Drive,
Thank you, sir.
right here in Jonesboro.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I have a computer lab. We can only sit 10 kids in it. Right now, we're running a summer program with Family Ties, and they have about 100 kids. So my interest in the land bank is either land donation or something we could buy, build maybe a 30-seat computer lab for the less privileged, and attach after school to the computer lab, and possibly a gym. So we'll keep the kids indoors instead of the gang activities in the low-income areas. That's my story. So as you develop your policies, I wanted it to be on your mind. If you acquired something that was big enough for us to build something like that, we'll be interested, either in partnership or however I'll work it out.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
We'll certainly keep that in mind. And As you can tell, we're learning and we're moving slow.
See that.
We're going to get, we're trying to be thorough and have a good foundation so we can do a good job with what we're attempting to do. Thank you for your comments, sir. Being that there are probably no other comments, does anyone have anything else? I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Doesn't require a second. All in favor? Okay, opposed? Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, each one of you, for your time. Appreciate it.